Here's what you missed this week on The Uncommon Good with Bo Bonner and Dr. Bud Marr. The Uncommon Good is on the air. I'm Bo Bonner.
And I'm Dr. Bud Marr.
We're coming to you from these United States of America, here in the middle of the country, good old Iowa, good old trusty Iowa, good old, you know what you're getting, Iowa, here in the convergence of two rivers that are extremely full, Bud, by the way. Have you noticed that? This is The Uncommon Good. I'm Bo Bonner. You might know me from being the morning show host on the Catholic Morning Show here on Iowa Catholic Radio. You guys all know Bud for many reasons, but Bud, tell them maybe a few that they might know you from.
If you have encountered a high-quality nurse here in the Des Moines area, I may have had something to do with it, not teaching them the practices and skills of nursing, but working at a college, specifically Mercy College of Health Sciences, who does do that, and I help our math, science, and English teachers as we give the students the educational foundation they need for their not simply nursing studies, but health sciences in general.
Absolutely. I'm sure that there are many people who've ran into different people who know us in Des Moines, but it has now been the case officially that multiple times in my career here, I've said, I'm friends with Bud Marr, and usually they kind of know me for like maybe the radio for one reason, but when I point out that like we do stuff together and that it's been going on for 8 years, all of a sudden light bulbs light up in their head and they know who I am friends with. Who we also want to say light bulbs lighting up. Imogene Ingredients, thank you for underwriting the show. I hopefully every time cattle or animals, if they sense they're getting Imogene products, hopefully a light bulb goes off in their, well, I don't know if they have minds, but you get my point, Bud. I bet they light up because they're all about nutrition. Thank you, Imogene Ingredients, for underwriting the show. It's the dog days of summer. We're going to talk about that. This is The Uncommon Good. Stick around. We'll be back right after this. Back with The Uncommon Good. Bo Bonner and Dr. Bud Marr joining you this week. Thank you for listening to the show. Excuse me. So wonderful to have you with us. Also, thank you to Imogene Ingredients for making our show possible. Bud, it is truly the dog days of summer. Now, it's been the case that some of the last few days have been actually nice. We got a weird late July, early August reprieve. But let me tell you, man, the week before that was like heat indices well above 100, approaching 110 sometimes. A lot of like moisture and humidity. I mean, the parts of the rivers are hitting flood stage, sort of derechos, maybe derechos. Just a lot of like sitting around feeling that sort of exhausted feeling. And in a human moment, Bud, maybe we should tell the folks what's been the big issue as we sit here, with the radio show.
I don't know.
We don't know what to talk about.
Oh, but I do have an idea. You mentioned the dog days of summer. This time of year actually really gets me thinking about time and the way that time is strange in that it can elongate and then also very quickly speed up. Mm-hmm. When you mentioned that reprieve that we've gotten or are getting, I start to think about the turn to fall. And I remember as a child when you were passing through summer, that sometimes it felt like summer would extend on forever. Like when it's like early July, maybe after the holiday, and it's a hot day with but it's also one that, like the sun sets very late. You just had this sense of like time had almost like stood still. But then you get to August, you get kind of a cool day like we had last week, and you start thinking about the start of the school year, and you recognize that the summer that seemed like it would go on forever is quickly coming to a close. Then you move into autumn with like the dying of the leaves and things like that. And you're reminded once again, I think more strongly than during the summer stage, of memento mori, and that, like we're all mortal, of the passage of time, of things changing. And we were just kind of riffing on this before the show started today. It really does. It's a good reminder to me to think of our place in the world as Catholics. And what I have in mind is I think in Scripture, especially in the New Testament, there's a lot of warnings against becoming too situated here on earth. Like the kind of metaphors that are used for the followers of Christ are that we're sort of like strangers in a strange land, that this world is not our home. We're journeying towards the eternal city, the heavenly Jerusalem. And so then there's, in turn, these kind of warnings against like storing up for yourselves treasures on earth. and kind of like becoming too comfortable in this space. But for me, that's also a real temptation. Like, I think my decision making often is sort of like influenced by anxieties about what the future might hold. And so it's sort of like a natural human propensity, especially as a father, to sort of kind of want to buffer yourself against the whims of what the world can bring you.
You know, it's interesting because when I think about what hitting around August 1st in the summer used to feel like as a kid versus now, I like you pointing out how this has sort of changed. When I was a kid, August 1st was like, oh man, you better hurry up and sort of drink every last bit of summer you have left. Mm-hmm. And so when August would hit, I think out loud, usually like summer baseball was either over or wrapping up really quick at that point. Like if you're doing interleague stuff, I don't know what it's like now when people do, sports 24/7. But I remember being like, oh, Walmart's starting to have, notebooks and pencils again. So you better really do summer. So funny enough, like usually at this point in time, I would already be staying up late. We were bad night owls, but I have to admit that like the first week or so of August, man, that's when we'd be like, let's stay up till 3. Let's do something where we stay up all night, right? That was when like stupid stuff like that was happening. You'd go to the pool as much as possible. You somehow redouble going to the pool if possible. But man, I have to admit now, when it hits August 1st, and probably because I've been a part of either school administration or teaching so long, that I'm like, oh goodness, like I need to hurry up and prepare, right? Like, school's going to be on us like any minute, and oh my gosh, I'm so behind. And so what I'm getting at is I like your point that time can slingshot back and forth between seeming like we have all the time in the world or we have no time. And this idea, of course, like not getting too comfortable in the world, being tied up with senses of time. But to go back to that great band from Oklahoma, the Turnpike Troubadours, they have a song where they say, hold on to the moment like it's heaven passing through. And that starts to be it, right? Is like we're really bad at saying eternity is only accessed in the present moment. You're not going to be able to retrieve it in the past, nor are you going to be able to speed it along and bring it. You have to, as it were, like be grateful and accept it how it is. But it's funny how, like you said, at these pivot points, not like the liminal seasons, right? So like when it's spring is becoming summer, it's kind of easier to be in the moment. Mm-hmm. When summer becomes fall, right? When school starts, I'm with you. Like that might be the most geared in to the current time I ever am, right? You're like, oh, students are coming back and football's going to start. But like it's here in the middle of those things where maybe we do a bad job of either looking to the past or trying to speed up too much instead of being appreciative to time right now, because as you say, that's actually where the eternity that like we're homesick for is most present in our lives. But it's hard to do. Yeah. It's hard to do in the dog days of summer.
We've mentioned his name on the show before, but our great professor, Stanley Hauerwas, ethics professor from Duke, he had that phrase. Do you recall exactly how it was phrased? Like God has given us all the time in the world to do like the works he's prepared for us, or
all the time we need, right? All the time in the world. No, you're right. It's either all the time in the world and like all the time we need. He says both of those with exactly this idea of we always, it's not even an excuse, but like we are sort of naturally built to be like, I have too little time or I have too much.
Yeah.
But like, no, you've been given the time you've been given, and it's perfect if you allow your will to be coterminous with God's.
There's another theologian who he influenced, Sam Wells, and Sam Wells wrote this book where what stuck with me is he talks about how a lot of kind of like the poor thinking that we have around ethics today is because we operate with an economics of scarcity.
Yep.
And how the gospel kind of explodes that way of thinking about things, where we talked about this recently on the show, but you think about the gift of the Eucharist, it's like a gift that almost like can't be divided into parts. And God gives himself, and the Mass is celebrated day after day around the world. And so like each day around the world, it's almost like this infinitely abundant resource, And I feel that way about time, where so often we kind of operate with this urgency of time. Like, this has definitely seeped into the language of our culture where it's like, I don't have enough time. Time is constantly slipping away. Right. And it creates this kind of frenetic pace. Whereas I think the sort of vision that we're meant to have by being called children of God is like Hauerwas used to talk about, that God has given us all the time in the world, and that frees us up to do things that the world considers very non-efficient or unproductive. So you think about the great saints throughout history, but even those who weren't necessarily like officially canonized. So I mentioned in the intro that I work at Mercy College of Health Sciences. I just think about the Sisters of Mercy, who trace their roots back to, like a radical path of life chosen by Mother Catherine Macaulay. And the sisters who came to Des Moines to set up what became like Mercy Hospital, they left their family and friends. I think many of them, when they crossed the ocean, they probably had to figure they would never see like their parents again, right?
Right. Yep.
Going to a place where, I mean, they had I don't think like they immediately set their eyes on Des Moines, but eventually landing here, like they had no context or reference point. But I think the understanding that God is calling us into a mission that has these kind of eternal reverberations gave them the courage to step on the boat.
I think about this in terms of like, if you go to the sheer measurements of time. So I'm looking at a book, Thomas Aquinas. I think sometimes people don't realize how early he died. He was in his 40s, right? So that would be, it might have been like 41.
About my age.
Yeah. And so it's interesting, right? You go, oh goodness. Think about all that he did. Mm-hmm. And so it's weird because we're all like, we also oscillate between giving ourselves big excuses and then also just like being our worst critics. So you go like, how dare you, right? Like, how have you not wrote a Summa, Bo? He didn't have kids. But anyway, but like, oh, how dare you? But, it starts to be that when you give yourself, the time to say, I'm going to put Christ first, I'm sure he, in some ways, would be argued in efficiency terms to have wasted all that time, right? What did he really do? But he prayed, and, then he wrote books, and like he gave sermons and lectures, but like that's what he was doing. It wasn't sort of like he was going into, the coal mines and you could sort of measure what he was able to get done. And so it's interesting. I think one way that the dog days of summer should teach us something is if you allow yourself to be bored, if you allow yourself to slow down and not have the thing that you're immediately doing next, you'll, funny enough, be able, like you said, to find that you've been given that time to do things that you didn't expect. Like, for instance, have a podcast episode that like you didn't necessarily have planned out like some of the others. And I think about that, about how lucky and blessed we are that we get to do this, weekly. And now when I say that's part of our job, it's not like we're getting Ferraris for having the uncommon good, but what a wonderful thing that to have, even if it's small in the grand scheme of things, people who, if we didn't have like if last week was the last podcast episode, the last radio show that we did, there would be people who would, think that that's a loss, that like something went away. And what a wonderful thing, what a wonderful obligation, and I mean that almost with quotations, to be able to have, because once a week, bud, we go, hey, we're going to take 45 minutes, an hour to set aside, and even in the dog days of summer, to see where the Spirit leads these conversations.
Well, this is where, to me, the theology of like the communion of saints enters into, it kind of impinges on how we live our lives in this sense. I think you were actually the first one to point out to me that the great sacrifices that were made to build some of the beautiful cathedrals that people still visit today. And it's kind of astounding to consider the fact that devoted Catholics who gave so that those churches could be built, but even those who worked on them and helped construct them, during those phases, many of those folks recognized like they would never see the finished product.
Yep.
And I think that's really countercultural to how we think today. Like, even if you think about conversations that your parish has had about a renovation or a new construction, we are sort of pulled into this, into these conversations about like, will it be functional? When is it going to finish? How much is it going to cost? And I'm not saying like we can't just sort of operate as if like resources are infinite. On the other hand, like there was this kind of like radical gratuity in building a church like Shark Cathedral, and the folks who started that project recognized like it would be their children or maybe their grandchildren who would, be able to fully experience that great gift. And I think they were able to do so because they recognized that their life couldn't be simply reduced to the number of days that they had on earth. And they saw the preservation of certain realities as significant enough to be committed to them with knowing that like they wouldn't fully experience them.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what's helped me be a teacher, or even when I think about any sort of hang-ups I had about like starting a radio show way back when we decided all that. I mean, the sort of joke I tell, but it's sort of serious too, is, when the day was approaching that we were actually going to start the Uncommon Good, there was a part of me that was like, well, who are you to have a radio show? Like, where do you get this big idea that you should do that? But then a different part of me answered like, well, at least you're better than someone worse. So like, if all I have ever done in this radio show is prevent someone worse from having a radio show, then I've done my part. And in weird Oklahoma logic, that sort of worked out. But I think, as we're, as this show is being created, we don't know who will listen to it. Maybe no one. It's not Chartres Cathedral, right? Where like you'll never see the cathedral done, but there's a way in which in teaching, you really do, try your best to scatter seeds, or like maybe it's better to say prepare the ground and hope that the seeds are scattered. But you never know. Even if like you're in an audience, like it's always fun to like talk to an audience and there's the energy there. And like you can tell that maybe people had a good time, but I don't know if you can truly say, what I said today, I know will have a finished full bloom flowering and I'll be able to see it. I think you and I would both say the same, that we have had the great opportunity, the great blessing to see some of the fruition of what we've been able to do as teachers or speakers or things like that. But at the moment of doing it, when I figured that out, when I said, I'm not going to be able to see in a discernible way, like you would if you like, guys, go dig a ditch, and now the ditch is dug. In order to be a good teacher, you have to relinquish that hope of the immediate feedback loop. Because even if people go like, I enjoyed your class, or I liked listening to you, that's different than I learned something from you, which always takes more time. But once you give that up, once you stop worrying about the future and rushing the future, you can really begin to love teaching.
When it comes to the metaphysics of the world, to drill a little bit deeper here, how do you think about, so even the greatest kind of monuments that human beings have built, so I've mentioned Chartres Cathedral, but remember when Notre Dame caught fire?
Yeah. And
you saw that on the television and you were like shocked, like, this building, which had required so much blood, sweat, tears, and resources, I mean, thanks be to God, it's been mostly preserved, right? But it was just kind of like stunning to see it on fire and think like, if something's not done, it could be brought to ashes. So when I say the metaphysics of the world, like even the greatest things that human beings will ever produce, like at some point they will come to naught. Do you think God sort of preserves, like in some ways is a beautiful cathedral kind of an idea in the mind of God that will exist after, things burn?
Ooh.
Because what I mean by that in part is like, I think about, okay, this is going to be funny to go from Notre Dame to basketball. But like, I sometimes talk to folks who say like, sports are silly, we shouldn't spend any time with them. And I get the point that like, they've become probably like too important to a lot of people in today's society. But I recently saw a photograph of Michael Jordan, and it was during the dunk competition, and his body, I mean, like, he was several feet in the air. I don't know. His vertical is what, like 43 inches or something.
Right.
But it was a moment frozen in time. And I thought, this is actually like a gesture towards transcendence, like just the artistry, the grace, and it got captured as a moment in time. And with someone like Jordan, it's almost sad to see him age. Like, you kind of want to capture and bottle like 28-year-old Michael Jordan. But that sort of ties back to what I'm saying about Notre Dame. Or like, you think about something like both of our children are involved in putting on a Shakespeare performance this summer. Like a great drama, even if it's like one of the greatest like written pieces that a human being has done, it has like this 2-hour window and then it's gone. So like, what's kind of like the human impetus to sacrifice to make these great things when in some level, like no matter how concrete you try to make it, it goes away.
Yeah, so there's a Japanese artist, writer, Mishima, and they have this whole movie about him. I don't know, it's rated R. You can't like universally like give a thumbs up to everyone, but like it really captures some of the most complex difficulties, right, about post-war Japan and its sort of spiritual crisis and things like this, but. Again and again in his stories, like I think one's called like the Golden Palace or something like this. You have these characters that are confronted by beauty, and they're in awe and terrified and in wonder of beauty, right? And it's overwhelming, but they decide the only thing they can do for it, like to possess beauty, is to destroy it. And so he has story after story where this sort of like aesthetic nihilism comes in, where like the only way that you're going to preserve something would be to destroy it, so that like it can't fade, it can't go bad, right? So like very artsy, but it's interesting because if you don't believe, like you say, that there's some way in which time can interact with eternity, what he's saying gets to your point. But I actually had the occasion to write this because there was a long story short, working with multiple people to make to get something that like was beautiful, that we renovated and things like this. And so this is what I said: the most glorious thing about art is that they could tear the entire building down tomorrow that the art was in, but for the brief moment in the scope of time, all of that human effort existed together in an interwoven tapestry of beauty that now rests in eternity. And as all of that was done for the glory of God, it will never fade away nor disappear, even if every single molecule of each aspect of, the works of art eventually fall apart. That galaxy of beauty lives forever in the mind of God now, and nothing can take that away. And so to me, that's where you start to say all human effort in the material world will come to naught, in terms of we are like grass, the flower that bloom goes away. I mean, like, all you need to do is read the Psalms or Ecclesiastes to get this. But because God is eternal and eternity is interior, more interior to every moment of time than any sequence of time itself or any elapsing of time, anything done for the glory of God that is truly beautiful and is the crafty work of human mind being instantiated in material reality, that moment reaches eternity and it will never go away. And to your point, I think that extends to things like Michael Jordan, the exquisite beauty of human athleticism. I don't think that moment passes away. The stadium he did it in, he of course he can't do that anymore. The moment is all gone, right? Like the cells on his body that he was composed of at that moment have gone away. The air is all changed, etc., etc. Someday Earth burns in the sun, but that moment is eternal because it is eternal in the mind of God, and that sort of beauty rings out in his mind. And yes, to answer your question, Bud, I absolutely believe the metaphysics of the world is, without that belief in eternity, beauty is almost too much of an injury to our soul. It would almost be like beauty mocks us. But because eternity is real, beauty is our portal in each moment by moment, to eternity. This is The Uncommon Good. Bo Bonner and Dr. Bud Marr. Stick around. We will be back right after this. Back with the Uncommon Good, Bo Bonner, Dr. Bud Marr, joining you this week. Thank you for listening to the show. So wonderful to have you with us. Tip of the hat to Imogene Ingredients for making the show possible. Thank you for underwriting the show. Bud, we're talking about the dog days of summer, but we really started talking about time, and I threw beauty in there. You were talking about Michael Jordan.
Right.
Player better than LeBron, I think. What, right? Everyone agrees with that? Okay. Yeah.
I hope a couple personal friends here in Des Moines are listening to the show right now.
Yeah, exactly. No. But just with that sort of idea about, if there is no such thing as eternity, and if there's no God, as it were, to sort of hold every moment of time in eternity, we were throwing out that beauty, or even just human striving, or just any sort of things that humans do, in some ways, if they were just made to rot, you can start to see like where some of the nihilists would seemingly have a point that like anything that exists is just going to go away anyway. So isn't it sort of mocking us that it can't stay? Now there's some people who go like, no, this is sort of like the heroic stance of humans, that we do things in time knowing that they'll go away, but we'll do them anyway. I don't agree. And usually that comes with some very violent metaphysics to like the level of things that they're willing to justify for this like heroic, Promethean, we're going to like make fire and hold it as long as we can. The implications for that are usually quite harsh. But I think if you go to this idea that if eternity is real, and we can get into like all of the reasons, of course, that I think we think it's real, that the glory and beauty of that is to say there is no time that is ever truly wasted if we live in the moment where eternity rests.
Well, I really liked the reflection that you had at the end of the first segment. And actually, as you were talking, the idea that came to mind for me is, when Christ says, whatever you've done to the least of these, you've done unto me. And I think you can only properly understand what our Lord was teaching there with that sort of, in the background, that relationship between time and eternity. Because, Bo, like, how is it that if we give water to the thirsty or we clothe the naked, that we do that unto Christ? Like, I think that act of charity, or we could say like that oblation, does echo into eternity. And like we've talked about on the show before, there will be like hard-nosed economists who will say like, that's sort of a waste of resources. Like, why don't you help that person find a job? And this is where I think, I think some of our best shows, honestly, is when we sort of stumble into a topic, when we're kind of befuddled beforehand. Because I think what we were discussing during that first segment, like there's so many theological implications there, because it's only through kind of like beginning to grasp. And I'm not saying like having a lot of book learning about, but starting to recognize like how you can enter into eternity even now, it opens up the possibility of Christian witness. So it's those small acts of charity. It's also, oh man, I should have researched this before the show started. The movie of Gods and Men, that's set in Algeria, right?
Yeah.
And with Benedictine monks who are there, or is it Trappist?
Trappist,
yes, right?
Yep.
And religious violence starts to break out in the area. And there's, I know there's like a radical Muslim group involved, but there were individuals who told these Trappist monks, like, the strife is breaking out. You'll be safer if you return to Europe. And I think when you watch that film, you recognize what I'm talking about, where they could have opted for security, but they realize like there's a way that they can give themselves, that they can become like that seed that falls to the ground, and something greater than what's like humanly imaginable can spring up out of that. And so like they had that sort of eternal perspective that gave them the courage to face down violence. And the way that their witness is remembered is, I think, like an affirmation of what we're talking about.
Yeah, I think of a few lines from that movie, which I think mostly rooted in conversations that they like had because of like notes and stuff like this. Maybe not all of them. And I heard that like people are kind of composite characters because they didn't want to have this huge cast. But at one point, one of the older monks, because the abbot allows them to vote, are we going to go or stay? And I'm not saying it's unanimous, but like I think maybe it was, and if it's not, the majority of them all stay. Mm-hmm. And one of the old monks says something to the effect of, when I was a young man, I was a slave to passions. I was a slave to this. I was a slave to that. I was a slave of being afraid to die. But now I'm old and I'm not afraid of death. And something effective like, you're looking at a free man. And, now they were all scared in the moment, like where they were being let off with guns. Like, that's not the idea that he's like some sort of like, Arnold Schwarzenegger of the spiritual life now. But I do think that like he gets at that. And then, the ending monologue, which is from a letter that the abbot actually wrote, is very powerful. Mm-hmm. And talking about, if I die, it's like you said, we should have researched it, but it's something to the effect of like, I hope I see, as God sees these his children, the Muslim Algerians,
like even in like the face of the one who pulls the trigger or something like that.
Yeah, and he goes and he goes like something to the like, you friend, like I write this to you, my friend of the last hour, that may we be happy thieves in heaven together. And it's very, but it's like you said, the sort of circumstances made them really say to live in that moment, and because they were able to see eternity bleed in. And I just realized now, right, that we have been, I'm hoping we're modeling this as like, we started off this episode not, like you said, exactly knowing where to go, but having a trust, right, that if we could just live in the moment and start talking, something would emerge. And I realized, Bud, that I'm going to call this episode The Dog Days of Eternity.
Oh, nice.
Because I think that like there is something... Boredom is and I'm riffing this from multiple people. I think Tim O'Malley has written a book on this. I think there was I know that I'm plagiarizing in some sense here, multiple people. But boredom is an important developmental thing for kids to go through, so that they can go like, okay, so the whole goal in life is not just to distract myself, but I should have to like sit listlessly with myself. And of course, you're not, like if you're really doing well in life, you're never bored because you're always, truly present to yourself. But that uncomfortability of boredom is sort of like, when kids have growth spurts and their legs hurt. In some ways, boredom is sort of like growing pains for living in time. Mm-hmm. And if you just, at every moment you might possibly be bored, sweep that away, you are going to miss this ability to learn to be comfortable with eternity being present in the moment now, rather than some time off in the future or some distance past from which you came.
Well, what's kind of cool about how this episode has worked out too is that it really ties in nicely to some conversations that we've recently had about sacrifice. Mm-hmm. So folks, if you're listening, you missed the episode like 2 weeks ago, basically like skip the Peter Thiel one and go back to, it was like a preview of this retreat that we were doing. But on the retreat, we talked to the guys who were there about how baptism is really a type of baptism, like a typological foreshadowing, is the binding of Isaac, where God calls Abraham to sacrifice his only son. And I think that relates closely to what we're sort of gesturing at on today's episode, where you said something a few minutes ago that if we didn't have a sense of eternity, that beauty would almost be unbearable. Uh-huh. And if you're a parent and listening to the show, you know how this goes. Like, yeah. I don't know about you, Bo, but like the first time I saw my daughter, it was like, there was just this overwhelming sense of like being moved, but almost like existential dread. Yeah. Because you realize there's this being that you couldn't have conceived beforehand how much you would love her. But now she's living in a world that you cannot control everything around her. I mean, when I drove home from the birthing center after Rachel gave birth to Madeline, I was driving like 7 miles per hour down 435, like in between Chapel Hill and Durham. Yeah. And it's just like cars are like whizzing by me and I'm like white knuckled. But like you think about like the gift of one of your own children and the beauty that's there. And there's this temptation to like cling to it and to possess it. I know I'm a bigger C.S. Lewis fan than you are, but in The Great Divorce, he's got this great sort of like parable of, like he presents, it's almost like a Catholic vision in the sense that like after death, there's still a journey. And he presents a woman who's like moving closer to God, but she turns away because she can't accept the fact that in heaven that like her son will love someone more than he loves her.
Yeah, yep.
So she has this like possessive parental love for her own son. And that's where like Satan sometimes, it's not that he presents us with like, ooh, these like terrible, like, here's a bag of candy laced with drugs. It's like these really good things, like the love that you have for your child. And he says like, can you, like he sort of like tempts us like, or deceives us. Like, can you trust God and turn that child over to God? I mean, that's what God asked of Abraham. And it, like, if you do so, won't he take the thing that you love the most? And that's where it has to be an oblation. I mean, Abraham doesn't sacrifice Isaac by like putting a knife to his throat, but he gives Isaac to God, I believe.
Well, but I'll actually talk about the actual Catholic Tolkien. No, I'm kidding.
Yeah,
but
right.
No, but to make a comparison to him, like, in the Silmarillion, which is his big elf story that not everybody reads, the elf Bible. But you do get like, so there's this entire city that's built. I'm not going to try to say the elf names and like go nuts. I'm just making this point that exactly.
I just imagine these like super serious Tolkien fans like,
yeah, exactly. Well, how dare you?
Terrible.
But so anyway, there's this very important city that's hidden from view, and a lot of the sort of good in that world comes from these elves who built that city because they want to preserve something about like the beginning and like what they were given. But it turns bad because they're so obsessed with making sure that this preserves and it never changes. And then this like introduces the ability for like so much horrible change to happen. And I mean, I think about you hit that like really well talking about kids is, you know, and I mean, I don't want to like hurt anyone's feelings is like, I remember thinking, oh man, I need to try to remember somehow to memorize what my kids sounded like when you first figure out that their voices change really fast. So this is like with my older kids. And I go, oh my gosh, there's this one point when like Stella, for instance, she kind of sounded like a Muppet, like when she would like get crazy or laugh or whatever. And you know, what's funny is like I can't remember that sound in my head. I can remember the fact of it, right? And I can remember how it was adorable, and I remember how, but I realized, right, that I could sit there my entire life and record like every sound they made, try to make a video of everything they do. But beyond like missing out because I was recording rather than living life with them, I realized that I would just be doubling this next concern because like, where would I keep all these photos? And I mean, even, you know, like we had largely digital photos with the first kids, but where would you keep them all? And, you know, and now the problem is with the younger kids, since they're all on our phone, now we have a billion photos. And so now like when you want to go back in time, you're like, what am I going to do? Like take hours to look through photos. And so what you start to realize as a parent, to your point, is because you love them and you love them the moment they're in right now, but you have to like be always willing to give up that version of your kids so that the growing kid takes their place. And you know what? If there is no eternity, like that really sucks to think of, right? Like there is no, like a 3-year-old Elias is gone. But like if we have eternity, you know, there's a way in which I go like two things. One, I go, well, there is in eternity, 3-year-old Elias is always being that little boy that I loved, but also because of like being held in eternity, like that 3-year-old Elias is part and parcel of who he is today. But if I held on and like tried to remember too much this snapshot in time, like I would have lost the essence of like that 3-year-old Elias who is the 18-year-old Elias now.
Yeah. And we mentioned Tolkien and C.S. Lewis, but I mean, this goes all the way back to the very beginning of the Bible. And that's really like the mistake with the Tower of Babel, right? Like when you read the story of the Tower of Babel, it's funny. Maybe you're different than I am, but like I have this kind of like reading impulse when I go through the Bible. I'm like, haha, like these dolts, what are they thinking? You know, so like the Tower of Babel, I'm like, oh yeah, these are the bad guys, like these villains or whatever. But what they,
I like that.
What they do is not that far from what God actually promises to his people. So God says to Abraham, I will make you a great nation. And you're like, your descendants will be more numerous than the stars. And so he promises this blessing. And I think that kind of blessing, I think the architects of the Tower of Babel, they want that sort of blessing, but they say to themselves, how do they say it? Like, we want to make a name for ourselves.
Yep.
And whereas God, it feels like in the Old Testament especially, God is always sending people out. And at the Tower of Babel, they want to like stay in place. And so they'll build this tower to heaven. And it's almost like, it's similar to kind of like wanting to like incessantly record your children or something.
Yeah.
Like they want to make this monument that will be free from the vagaries of time. And they'll reach eternity sort of through their own kind of like conniving.
Yeah.
But like, then you get to the New Testament, and with the way of the cross, again, we're always being called out. Like, I think after Pentecost, it feels like maybe the apostles mistakenly think like, we're going to stick around. And then this persecution starts, and it's actually the persecution that drives the followers of Christ out into like, because Jesus says like the gospel go to Judea, Samaria, and even to the ends of the earth. And it's the persecution that sort of like is the fuel behind that.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
I mean, we could multiply examples. Like the last one that I'd probably mention is like Peter, when our Lord sets his face towards Jerusalem and he says like, this is what I'm being called to. Peter tries to call him off that. During the transfiguration, he says like, let's build these like booths here to like memorialize this. And so there are times where we're called to, like, we do stop and we remember, and that remembering is important, but it can become an obstacle to whatever God is calling us to next.
Yeah, and this is what I immediately thought of as poetry and art in general, and I mean it by this. It's actually never the one specific instance of the artwork. So, for instance, how many countless frescoes are gone forever? Mm-hmm. How many beautiful buildings have fallen? And actually how many poems have actually been forgotten?
Yeah.
How do they survive? Let's go with poetry. How do poems survive? And you're like, that's not true, Bo. Like, people have set down books. And you're like, well, no, even then, right? Most of you, of course, don't even read it in the original language. And then, like, we can get into these things where this is where, like, an overemphasis on literary culture, like with the Bible, they start going like, oh, well, there's not, like, these copies. And you go, well, that's misunderstanding what we mean by this. To have a poem passed down, the way it really survives is if it is sort of the foundational text for other stories that become variants of that. So, what's interesting for me is, like, I always like to bring up Robin Hood. Mm-hmm. The reason Robin Hood is eternal is not because any one particular version of Robin Hood has become so foundational that we go like, nope, that's Robin Hood and only this is Robin Hood.
Yeah.
Robin Hood becomes eternal in this way because we can keep telling stories either about Robin Hood or we tell Robin Hood type stories, right?
Yeah.
And they actually come up in all sorts of different ways, and they're adapted to different times and things like this. And you start to see this, right, that, artwork is really eternal when it starts being reinterpreted through time. And so, when you think about some of the earliest images of Our Lady in the icon traditions, it's not one icon specifically that is the artwork par excellence. It is the tradition of, having like Mary with Jesus on her lap, right? The Mary throne of wisdom. There's thousands of Mary's throne of wisdom. So it sort of outlives itself now. But the way that happens is someone at some point at one time tried to focus, and I'm going to give my all to this specific artwork. I'm going to pour myself into it, and then did such a great job that people emulated them through time. That's like the sort of closest thing that our memory becomes eternal, is not the one specific artifact, but the way in which artifacts throughout time instantiate an idea that keeps coming back and keeps being retrieved.
That's where, for me, when you first started like delving into literary theory, like in graduate school and things, like you first start to learn about like textual criticism, and then you get into, well, I mean, for folks listening, like for some like literary critics or like textual theorists today, when they talk, it almost sounds like the meaning of the text is completely destabilized. Yeah. In fact, there's this author, Kevin Van Hooser, and he's written a book, Is There a Meaning in This Text?, that sort of gets at like how difficult it is to sort of like pin down like authorial intention. And so literary theorists or literary critics, like they'll say things like, the interpretation of a text becomes part of its meaning. And for some folks, that's kind of like unsettling because we want like a firm foundation to stand upon. When I became Catholic, those sort of ideas sounded really freeing to me.
Yep.
Because what we're about is a conversation that takes place over time. And so from a Catholic understanding, like that makes complete sense. Like even think about the Bible contained sort of in and of itself. Like you cannot read the binding of Isaac the same way after you know who Jesus Christ is.
Absolutely.
That text takes on like new meaning. But then like the celebration of the Mass across time, the lives of the saints, they add these like new shades to things that we've been remembering for a long time. So like this kind of like this search for a horizon where we can somehow sort of like pin down the original autographs or something, and that's going to provide us like a certainty that we didn't possess beforehand. I just think it's kind of like it's a chimera. It's a false sort of like desire.
I think that is the sacrificial act of every artist, every writer, is when you put it down, whatever medium you put it down in, and you say, I can have the intent which I meant, I can have the reason I did it, I can have even what I hope people would interpret it to mean. But the minute I put it outside of myself and give it for public consumption or, engagement, it's not mine anymore. And of course, like so much of me is put into that work of art, and it will always be there, right? Like that eternity part. But, art that tries to only mean exactly the thing you meant in that moment right then is propaganda, and it's the most worthless art that there is. But true art is when the artist puts all of their being. They try to put it all there as much as possible, and then willingly gives it away. And in that way, it can become eternal because it becomes something outside of me, and it's no longer that one moment in time, like the Babelists try to do, where they're like, let's stay in this moment forever. But now that thing can live a full life and divide, be fruitful and multiply. That's the word I was thinking of. And by doing that, that's how art can come close to that eternity. That's when authors like come close to that eternity. But funny enough, it's like you said, we have to give up on this idea of like this one person, this one time tried to do one thing and meant it this one way. No, they very lovingly sacrificed it and offered it up to us, and that's how it can approach eternity. This is The Uncommon Good. Bo Bonner, Dr. Budmar. Stick around. We'll be back right after this. Back with The Uncommon Good, Bo Bonner, Dr. Budmar, joining you this week. Thank you for listening to the show. So wonderful to have you with us. We want to say thank you to Imogene Ingredients for making the show possible by underwriting it. Good folks out there, we appreciate it very much. Bud, very much impressed about how show magic works. Basically every time. Dog days this summer, allow yourself to sit there with your buddy in two comfortable chairs and start talking and see where the conversation will lead.
Right. No, I was pleased at how it turned out, and I think we need to start planning less for the show. No,
even less? Wow, that's impressive. No, but yeah, I see your point. Hey, but if speaking of maybe plans people want to make, if they want to plan to pray with us, what are ways that they can do so?
You know what? I made the mistake of not pulling up the schedule during the break, but I know we do pray the rosary at 4:30 a.m. I want to say 6 a.m., and I know at 8:30 p.m., there's also another time mid-morning. I won't lead anyone astray. And then the Chapel of Divine Mercy at 2:57 in the afternoon. But the great thing is you can get the Iowa Catholic Radio app on your phone and pray the rosary with us anytime, anywhere.
Absolutely. Coming up, folks, is the Great State Fair of Iowa. And, of course, as always, Iowa Catholic Radio will have its booth out there. You can go to iowacatholicradio.com to check out the events at any time that we're up to. But that's the one to remember. We're going to be there at the fair. We hope to see you there, and we want to thank our volunteers for being out there as well. Make sure, if you want to make sure, I should say, that shows like this keep on trucking along, that Iowa Catholic Radio keeps connecting listeners to Christ. We need your donations to do so. You can donate at 515-223-1150 or go to iowacatholicradio.com. Safely and securely donate by clicking on the donate button. Bud, have a wonderful week.
Yeah, come find us at the fair. Tell us what your favorite food is when you stop by.
Absolutely. This is The Uncommon Good. May Jesus Christ, the Prince of Peace, reign in our hearts, our family, city, state, nation, solar system, galaxy, the whole kit and caboodle. This is The Uncommon Good, and we'll be back next week.